One-party rule results in censorship, false imprisonment, and worse, we ignore it at our peril. Today, we continue our discussion on the impact with UFA's founder, Jimmy Page, and that is next. Hey, welcome back to the Farah Show, where we talk about culture, politics, and leadership. And you want to subscribe. That would make my wife really happy. Today, we look at Mao, Xi, and parallels here in the United States. So we brought on expert Jimmy Page, a student of history, a lover of freedom, and one who knows that Lenin and Hitler and Mao were not good guys. And unfortunately, not everyone understands that today. He's also one who knows that the deplorable speech by the President of the United States just recently, early in September, had eerie similarities to how those bad guys had come to power. So, hey, Jimmy, thanks for joining us today. It's really great to have you with us. Thanks for coming on.
You bet, Barry. Excited to be with you. And this topic, of course, is probably more relevant right now than ever before in American history.
I would have to agree with you. It really is. It's kind of scary in a way to be actually seeing ourselves talk about this. Just 5 or 10 years ago, I would never have thought that I would actually be looking at parallels to the way that things have happened in the 20th century for those dictators and what's happening today in China would actually be happening here in the United States. Unbelievable. Yeah. But hey, before we jump into the politics, I think our audience would love to get to know you and your family just a little bit. So who's Jimmy Page?
You bet. Thanks, Barry. Well, hey, listen, about little over a year ago, I jumped into this fight for freedom, started a nonprofit called the Unstoppable Freedom Alliance, which you mentioned at the outset. But before that, I spent about 17 years working in the ministry with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, working with coaches and athletes, developing leaders and cultures that promoted the gospel. And then before that, I had a career in health and wellness, sports performance, physical training, rehab. And along the way, I've enjoyed being an author. I'm a 7-time author, speaker, and I speak on leadership, culture, inspirational and motivational topics.
That is awesome. Wow, fantastic. And been married for about 3 decades, if I remember right.
Yes, coming up on 30 years this November to my college sweetheart. We both went to Virginia Tech. We've got 4 kids. Yeah, those kids are all grown, actually.
That's great.
3 of those, my first 3 sons have graduated from Liberty University, and they're all working and employed and having a great time working in areas that they're passionate about. And my daughter is still at Liberty University. She's a sophomore there. So hopefully in short order, we'll have all 4 through Liberty University.
That's exciting. That's great. What a great family. That's wonderful. Well, hey, let's talk about the freedom principles through the lens of what is transpiring in China and how you see some parallels today. So first of all, from last week's podcast, thanks for listening to that for me. I appreciate it. Now I know I have now at least 2 listeners on that. No, I'm teasing. So I do appreciate that. What horrible thing, I learned a lot when I always learn something when I do my research, but what horrible things stuck out to you that came from what they're doing now in China as it relates to just their overreach?
Well, I think the most important thing that I was struck by the entire podcast, which was excellent, by the way, was the direct parallels between what's happening in Xi's power in communist China, and which seems to be happening at an accelerated rate here in America. You know, and I made 2 pages of bullet point notes and kind of drew the line between what is happening in China and what's happening in America. And it's pretty remarkable how similar things are going. So, for example, I'll give you a couple of easy ones.
Well, let's do them one at a time so that do them one at a time so the audience can kind of follow along. You've got a table in your head, so let's just take them one at a time. You want to start with education, or what's good to start with for you?
Sure, education is an easy button.
So with education, how is the USA following some of the concerns you have about what's going on in China, where they have one-party rule?
Yeah. Well, I think the school system is interesting because, education is at the root of our culture, right? Whatever we're teaching our kids in school is going to affect us for generations to come, right? And some interesting ways that our schools are a pawn in this control is many colleges that receive their public school funding still have mandatory vaccines to attend college campuses. Even today, knowing what we know about vaccines, knowing what we know about
my kids are out of college. They're just a little bit older than yours.
Yeah.
That's just bizarro to me that's actually still happening. So we have basically proven from the CDC itself that these vaccines and boosters do not prevent you getting COVID. It is possible that it reduces some of the long COVID. And I'll give you that. I'll give you 100% of that, even if it's not proven to be 100% of it. Of course, we also have some proof that there's some negative things with some, and that the VA ERS, where you show the vaccine bad responses where people have had side effects, that's getting pretty large number there. A lot of people have died. Yeah. So we don't know if all of that's from the vaccine or not, but there's been a lot of adverse reactions. But even if none of that was true, and even if the only part that's true is that with the latest thing the CDC has said, which is they do not act, this is what they've just said, they do not actually prevent the virus, and young people are not nearly as adversely affected normally. There are some that have long COVID, but usually there's an obesity issue or some other immunocompromised thing. But you're telling me that your kids that are still in college have to have a vaccine to go there, or are you saying Liberty has an exception?
Yeah, there's very few colleges still around that don't require it. Now, Liberty University, of course, being a conservative Christian university, does not require it.
Well,
and that's why my daughter is on campus. Yeah.
Well, yeah, good deal. Okay, good.
Yeah.
But do they require masks? Do you have to have masks to the school?
Okay, no.
Good. But some colleges still do?
Oh, yeah, a significant number. In fact,
unbelievable.
You'll also note that we've got a lot of friends that have played college sports, and they had these vaccine mandate requirements for college teams. In fact, we know some of our kids, our friends' kids, were separated from their teammates, put in another locker room, separated from them. They weren't allowed to travel with the team. They were traveling separately. They were allowed to stay on the team because of a religious exemption, but they were treated as a separate entity on this team for the entire season. And this is still happening on teams across our college landscape. It's just ridiculous.
So is this just, what's the motive? Is this just control? They can't be that dumb. I mean, do you think they're truly that dumb that they just can't read the science, or is it just control, or what could possibly be the motive at this juncture, this far down? I'll give them grace for the first 3 months or so if they didn't read the Imperial College study, which originally predicted what ended up happening, which is you're not going to be able to control this thing, and you can mitigate, and good, strong immune systems are not going to be that badly affected. Folks with some issues are going to be affected badly. A lot of people are going to die. It was a sad report, but that was way back in March of 2020. But let's say you didn't read that and you didn't believe it until later. Now I don't know how you could refute that. And at this juncture, what could be their motive to continue to have that overreaching of a COVID policy?
Well, I think it stems from the fact that the overall prevailing approved narrative at the highest levels of our government has always been singular, right? We're under this emergency use authorization for the vaccines.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So we have this prevailing narrative. There was pressure from the administration from the very beginning for schools, for companies, for other organizations to execute this mandatory vaccine game plan, even when the federal government lost the case and the mandates kind of went away for federal employees, although some of those are still in place, believe it or not. Our military is a great example of that. But I think it's because the narrative from the very top and the pressure, and this is why the parallel to the Xi leadership in China is so stark, because the messaging from the top, the pressure from the top, everyone's in lockstep. And I think that it's not going away anytime soon. I really don't think it is. So
in education, your kids go to a good, solid school that actually still teaches stuff. But when you got a school, some of these colleges are truly almost worthless in terms of the education. And I'm a big college guy. I mean, I've got an MBA. I'm a big My dad had a PhD before he went to heaven. And, we're a family that believes in and loves education in the old sense of the word, where education is something where you actually have the rigor of learning things, and there's truth to be discovered and debated and understood, and a true education. So I'm all about education and advanced education and higher education. So I'm not against that. But man, some of these schools, they seem to be off the charts going into the gender affirming stuff and just completely redefining things and making things up. I mean, the history is and some of these guys don't even know that there were dictators in the 20th century. So from my perspective, education's in serious peril.
Oh yeah.
When you look at the parallel to the China education system, that to me seems interesting. It's a little different almost, because they seem to still have a connection between getting their people trained on science and math and certain things, maybe not history. They don't want them to know that Mao killed 80 million people, but science and math they're doing well on. But what are the parallels in China's education system, in your view, and our higher education? Obviously not Liberty and some, Hillsdale and ORU and some of those good schools that still, to the most, as best as they can, still teach things. But what are your thoughts there?
Well, I actually believe that our entire educational system has collapsed. It is no longer. Yeah, and that sounds extreme, but the more you know, the more evidence there is to support that. We are not about education anymore. We're actually about indoctrination. And again, this is another parallel, I think, from the administrative perspective, is that the unions control education. The unions are controlled by the UN. Very few people know that. The UN educational objectives are actually an indoctrination objective. It has everything to do with gender fluidity, with all of these, the Title IX, the new Title IX guidelines from this administration are being weaponized against schools as we speak. So even from the youngest ages, we are being indoctrinated into this gender ideology. Our kids are being exposed to material that you would never let your kids be exposed to hypersexualize them and actually to groom them for sexual abuse later in their lives. It's been proven that there's a direct line to that. And now we've got these new Title IX guidelines, which basically protect biological boys. They're allowed to compete against biological girls. And federal funding is being withheld from our schools for lunch programs for any school that doesn't go along with this.
And that is, to me, absolutely crazy Looney Tunes. So what we're basically saying out of the DOJ is, you, school A, are not going to have your funding for kids to eat lunch if you don't agree with us and openly promote these gender, and I'm going to use their language, these gender affirming studies. What's gender affirming mean to them? Kindergarten through third grade, we start to teach you that you might not be what you think you are. You might not be a male or a female. So the whole concept that used to be unilaterally accepted, the founders had no clue this would ever come up. They didn't, they would have put something in the Constitution to protect against it. But you are created in God's image, male and female. And that's the beautiful thing. That's why you get equal treatment under the law. Then you do have a merit-based society, which is good. Then when you accomplish something, you can actually look at that and say, hey, I actually accomplished that. I didn't get an unnecessary subsidy and hand up. I actually, or handout. I may have had a hand up, but I didn't get a handout. And I actually accomplish something. That's kind of the USA way, the idea of American freedom. And that's what they've done, starting with this gender stuff, is just completely trashed the basic foundation of the United States concept, which is you can have equal treatment under the law. So this just sets up everything for CRT and all of the other madness in schools, which is you don't get equal treatment. I mean, it's crazy that it's actually against the law right now to have a dormitory that doesn't allow all races. Yet all of these schools like Berkeley have these dormitories that only allow a certain race there for their safe place. It's crazy.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think this is a perfect setup, right? Because the DOJ stands in direct opposition of parents today.
Right.
This is another piece. It's another layer
Right.
of our educational system. In fact, the DOJ, the Attorney General for the United States, classified parents who show up at school board meetings as domestic terrorists. They actually put them on the list and said, and then energized the FBI to target them. So I think the great thing about that is, for people like you and I, what that did was that energized me to show up more often at the school board meetings, right?
Yep.
But the fact that not only are parents targeted just because they're participating in what's happening with their kids' education, worse than that, faculty, staff, teachers, counselors are allowed by law in many states across the country to have secret conversations with your kids as young as kindergarten about their gender. And then those conversations are kept from mom and dad. Now,
that's horrible.
Most parents, when they find out that's happening, they say, there's no way that can be happening. And then, of course, story after story after story where this is happening, it's revealed.
Unbelievable. So the parallel to China in education, in your view, is that the agenda to control outcomes is happening.
Yes.
But the outcomes are a little different. In China, they want you to be real smart in science and math, and they just want you to be loyal to the one party. So really the parallel is we want you to be loyal to the ideology in the US. We want you to be loyal to the ideology of this whole new way of thinking that everybody's a racist unless you're not white, and your gender can be whatever it is. You can have, you can change it on a whim, and history isn't true. I mean, those are the biggies in education that are crazy. And
we're taking steps, right? We're taking steps towards an authoritarian, totalitarian government, because when you're undermining history, when you're rewriting history, and you're demonizing everyone in your history, it's easy to rewrite a new future, right? Our kids are being taught to hate America. They're being taught to really be anti-faith, believe it or not. I read some poll that less than half of Americans would consider them people of faith anymore. That's a shocker.
It is.
And in addition to that, if you can destroy the nuclear family by creating this division between kid and parent, now all of a sudden your agenda is very easy to execute, right? You've got obedient kids coming up, made to be social activists, acting in direct conflict with most of our traditionally held values, like work ethic, like integrity, like hard work, being on time, those types of things. Those are all now racist ideas. When you can do that, you create a populace that is dependent upon the government for almost everything and willing to go along with the government in objection to their parents and their traditional values.
Well, let's look at another parallel area. Though I'm sure we could spend the whole rest of the podcast on education. There's so much there, and it is frightening. Let's look at the media. So the goal of the media, when a one-party rule comes into play, is to control it. Hitler controlled the newspapers. Lenin controlled everything. Stalin controlled everything. Mao controlled all of the media, and anyone that tried to express themselves in a different way literally got shot or sent out to an internment camp where you never saw them again and were forced into slave labor of some kind. So what is the parallel from, and now Xi, in a much less violent way, I'll give him that, it's not been violent, but he's been in power since 2012, and his angle is to, have the media in lockstep. He controls the internet to an extent, and in China, so that's 1.4 billion people that see a certain things, a certain lens, and are not able to see other things. I guess there are some backdoor ways, but it's difficult. And he is attempting to keep his one-party rule through a number of things legislatively, but also this control over the media. What's happened in the United States, in your view, that's a parallel in the last 3 years on the media?
Well, I think we've seen that our government, this party, has commanding heights, I would say, over the media. Commanding heights, meaning complete control over the media, social media, internet, content, et cetera. You have to go kind of into the quote unquote conspiracy theory environment to get alternative ideas. So the big boys like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, our administration is actively engaged in influencing the content that is allowed on these platforms, asking them, which when your government asks you to do things, that's a pretty serious thing, right? First of all, it's a violation of federal law. The government can't actually influence private media or private companies to do something that they can't do. So the federal government can't censor free speech. So they're getting their proxies, which is social media and all media, and also private companies to do it for them. Right. What we've known from testimony is that the FBI has had conversations with the founder of Facebook, and they've told them to bury stories or to be on guard for different misinformation or disinformation apart from the national approved media narrative. And they're doing this, and all of these organizations are doing it. I can tell you the censorship, if you will, through our social media companies is very real. Now, some people would say it's not censorship because they're private companies, but I would argue that they are acting as an extension of our administration and narrowly to one view.
It's clearly censorship because when a fact-based podcast gets censored based on an opinion on, let's say, vaccines, and another non-fact-based podcast does not get censored on vaccines, but the one that doesn't get censored, not using any facts, not using any science, but just an opinion, does not get censored, but it's in the right opinion column. And the one which has facts supporting it, you might not agree, but it has facts. It's got some science behind it. It's got support, and it gets censored. There's clearly censorship based on opinions. And the whole idea that a political foe, no matter how much you don't like him or whatever you feel of him or think of him, could be literally censored off of a platform is absurd. But that happened. And we've kind of forgotten about that. But that is unbelievable. Yes. Anyway, I interrupt. So the media has parallels.
Well, it's happening. And organizations like Facebook, and they claim to have independent fact checkers, but under oath, of course, they testified that they're neither independent nor evaluating facts. They're opinions, and they testified to that. But we've experienced this, and you may as well. They warn you, they give you a strike, then they delete content, then they remove your account. And virtually zero appeals process, I can tell you. There's almost no way that you can get reinstated once you've been canceled. Any post that goes against the official government-approved narrative is at risk, particularly with respect to COVID, anything with gender ideology, or any of the garbage that's going on in our schools. Those things will be flagged and will be taken down.
Yeah, they change in terms of their highest priority. During COVID, it seemed like it was vaccines.
Yes.
And any alternative views or anybody that said anything about herd immunity, even if they used the very same words of Dr. Fauci from 2017 on herd immunity, they were not allowed. And then it seemed to change more recently to be related to the education hot buttons, CRT, gender ideology, all the gender dysphoria, gender delusionment. But okay, let's move to corporations. So
real quick, just to wrap that one up. I think that there's a chilling effect going on, and this is why this matters.
It does.
Every single person with a podcast, every single person with a platform now is in essence self-censoring. Why do I know that? I do it every time before, even if I'm posting an NIH website reference. I think to myself, well, gosh, is the NIH in the group? But anyway, we're self-censoring, which I think is bad for free speech, and it's bad for America, and it's exactly what they want us to do.
100% agree with you, and it is. So let's move to corporations. In China, they have state-owned entities, and they have kind of a hybrid. They've got state-controlled entities, and then they've got these organizations that are just highly monitored. So how is that happening in the United States, or what parallel is there with corporations? Are they being used as well to bully the citizens here, and how so?
I think this is one of the areas that's most disturbing. I mean, education's bad because they're going after our kids, but companies are particularly disturbing. For example, the DOJ and the FBI are now coercing credit card companies like Visa, MasterCard, and banks to track purchases of firearms, ammunition, firearms classes, you name it, and they're keeping lists on everyday Americans based upon your purchases. If your purchases don't line up with the national narrative, the approved narrative, and that ideology of this one party, if they don't, you get put on a list. In fact, I just had a guest on my podcast who you would know for sure is a highly respected national, international speaker. His name is Nick Vujicic, and he has no limbs. No, he was born without arms and legs. Mm-hmm. He started to express his pro-life views, his beliefs on social media, and then he got a letter from his bank, which told him, we did a review of your account and who you are, and we no longer are going to be doing business with you because we don't align with your ideology. That is a problem. That should be a very scary moment.
That is very scary. And of course, we've heard a number of stories of people who are famous where this has happened, and they attempt to do that to chill everyone else out who's not as famous. Do you know anyone that's maybe not famous? You don't have to say their name, but that's kind of maybe in that middle tier that's just got thousands of followers instead of millions of followers that has had something like that happen to them, where they've either had a letter from the DOJ or the FBI or a corporation or some rendition of an attempt to chill them?
Yes. Well, it happened for months on end, actually, through the COVID challenge, because people's jobs were threatened based upon their willingness to get a vaccine or to wear masks.
Right.
So I know personally of thousands of nurses that we've worked with who lost their jobs because they had religious exemptions, and then they had adverse reactions to the testing. So, but because of the narrative that this was required, they lost their jobs. This is happening everywhere. Another big way is doctors all across the country and really around the world are receiving threatening letters from the medical board that are threatening their medical licenses around what they communicate in the confidential patient-doctor relationship.
Right.
If they suggest that they could have an alternative treatment, if they suggest that there might be adverse reactions, that it might not be best for them, they can lose their medical license.
Well, let me just say something on that I know about. This is a story I know.
Yeah.
So there's a pastor in a city not too far away from you. I'm going to protect his identity so he didn't get beat up. But he went out strong and said, we're going to find out this protocol because I want my people to be taken care of. Yes. So it's a large enough church that they had a known 330-ish at the time. Last time I talked to him, it might have been slightly higher than that now, that got COVID. And this is every age group, all the way up to, I think the oldest was 90 and the youngest, a kid. And so that's a decent sample size. 30 people's a sample size, 100's better, 300's pretty good sample size. Yeah. 0 hospitalizations, 0. They went through the protocol, and the protocol that they came up with was kind of a combination of what you heard in Florida that was happening with the monoclonal and things that are supposed to be outlawed, that previous to this time, those particular drugs were well used all across the planet, actually. Yes. And they combined it with some health things that pretty much everyone knows, D3 and K2 and all that stuff. No hospitalizations, 0 deaths, 300. So my point isn't that there couldn't have possibly been a larger sample size and we would have, had an unfortunate thing happen. That's possible. And it could have had somebody with more compromised conditions. But my point is that that's never talked about. Why not? Why wouldn't you be curious about that? Wouldn't you want to investigate that and think about that and understand what actually happened there? Yeah. So the parallel to me with China is they don't want that truth. Any alternative truth that comes out, they don't want that. That's why they're able to do this crazy current COVID lockdown right now that's still going on today. Yes. All right, the last area for a parallel, we've got corporations, we've got the media, we've got education. The general threat from the head of the party is to squelch a reaction. And we just have 5 minutes. So if you could just think about it from that perspective. But what would be the parallel between the one party rule that we currently have with Xi in China and the president of the United States saying what he said September 1st, that people that are Republicans and that believe that voted for Trump are dark, and that they are liars. They've made their choice. They're terrorists. They should be stopped. They should be treated as enemies of democracy. Pretty intense stuff. So what's the parallel between that and then what he's attempting to communicate through the DOJ and the FBI in China?
Yeah, well, I think he's trying to silence people without the use of force, right? When the leader of America calls out their political opponents and then weaponizes the DOJ, the FBI to raid the home of a former president, even though there were ongoing conversations happening around confidential documents. When that happens, when you can surround a private citizen, Mike Lindell, at the drive-through of a Hardee's, I think it was, which is embarrassing. He should be a little embarrassed.
Let the guy have his bad for you food first. I mean, give him a chance to eat it.
If it was Chipotle, we would be more forgiving. But it's okay.
They wouldn't have done it at a Starbucks. I can tell you that.
No way. Exactly. But when that can happen to private citizens, where your cell phone can be confiscated just for having a different political opinion, the effect that it has on everyone else is to push you underground. It makes you very quiet. It makes you very hesitant to have these conversations in public with your neighbors or maybe with your coworkers, because you don't know what our government is capable of doing. When they're showing up and raiding individuals around our country, that's a big problem. You see in other parts of the world, the same thing is happening, but they're imprisoning people. I think we're not that far off from that. What I love about America is we've got a lot of patriots left who love America, who love our founding values, who love the system of a constitutional republic. Thank God we're not a democracy or mob rule, or a mobocracy, as I call it. Thank God we're not a mobocracy. We are a rule of law, constitutional republic.
Amen.
I think what's happening is the harder the pressure from the top, from this president and his administration, the greater the rebellion, if you will. There is something inside of us that wants to pursue freedom and righteousness and do the right thing. And I think we're growing by the millions as we speak.
Oh, that is so encouraging to hear. And by the way, thanks so much for coming on our program. I could talk to you for hours. Ours is a little shorter than yours, though. We try to keep it to around 25, 30 minutes. That's because I only have so much to say when I talk. But this was great. We know she has this clear, undisputed one-party rule, and that's not the case here yet. In fact, there was an interesting little thing I just saw from Trafalgar, the guys that predicted correctly the last 3 elections. And they said, look, we can't estimate how many Republicans, even after this last speech, are not talking to the pollsters. And so it's anywhere from 2 to 10 points. So when you see something even, we could be winning by 2 to 10 points. So that's a good thing. And, over time, when brave people cave, you're toast. But when brave people stand up and they're not quiet and they get louder during times like this, that's a great thing. So I'm going to give you one last word here. What can you say to encourage the audience to just be brave, to speak up now?
Well, keep showing up. Do not be intimidated. We cannot let our government bully us into silence. The other thing I would say is get your church leaders in the game. If you are a person of faith and you go to church and your church isn't actively engaging in our culture around moral truth, our lane is truth. It's not politics. And we should fearlessly, courageously speak on issues of moral truth, because it transcends politics in every area of life. And the church and its people need to get their voice back. But listen, you have to be willing to count the cost. There is a price to be paid today to stand up for righteousness and truth. Don't be afraid of that. Keep showing up at the local level.
I agree with you 100%. That's beautifully said. And my tag along to that is we do have a First and Fourth Amendment, and it is on our side. So
Yes.
don't relent. You have a voice. America's special because of that First and Fourth Amendment. You really do have some special protections. And if you're a volunteer, you actually have special protections as a volunteer for a nonprofit to speak your mind. So there are layers, but now's the time to be louder, not quieter. Let's
Yes.
not allow our wonderful country, this great American idea, to lose its freedoms. So I'm hoping everybody will heed your call, my friend Jimmy
Yeah.
Page, and that they will stay strong and vote in a smart way this time around.
Yes.
God bless you to your freedom.
Hi, I'm David Farah. Thank you for listening to my dad's podcast, The Barry Farah Show, Culture Shift. Click subscribe now to be sure you don't miss an episode. Share this podcast with your friends on social media and give The Barry Farah Show your 5-star rating. See you next time.